This case is a great example of how addiction can ruin your life. But before we get into it, let's do the disclaimers. This is a true crime case, therefore it's a real story. It involves real people and they have real families. So although I do want you to comment and I do want you to share, please do so with sensitivity. Carrie McGuinness was born in 1987. She had a pretty great start to life. Despite her parents getting divorced, both her parents were loving and supportive. Carrie went to university and got qualified as a teacher. From then on, she had various occupations. She'd been married and she had 2 children. But in her 20s, she got into some financial troubles. She was in debt and she started drinking heavily during the relationship with her children's dad. Then in 2012, she got convicted of drunk driving. A year later, in 2013, she assaulted a partner, causing actual bodily harm. That came during an argument. She was very drunk and she punched him 6 or 7 times in the face and then picked up a glass and threw it at him. And that caused a cut to his right eye. And Carrie did accept causing these injuries. But as she told the police that she accepted causing them, she also told them that she couldn't remember anything about that incident because she was too drunk. Now remember this as the incident from 2013 because the judge does refer back to it later. While talking to police, she did also say that this wasn't the first time that she had memory problems due to drinking. I mean, let's not demonize that far too much. I think that most of us, especially in his teen years, have drank that much that we can't remember everything that happened the night before. As a result of that ABH, a restraining order was issued, banning her from contacting him. At this point, it's quite clear that it's alcohol that's leading her life and ruining it. But at times, she did seek help for her alcohol addiction. But in February 2014, she was admitted to hospital because she was suffering seizures from excessive drinking. At times, Carrie did do a good job at not drinking, but as is more often than not the case with addiction, during the hard times, moments of trouble, Carrie would go back to drinking heavily. In April 2014, she breached the restraining order and received a fine. Another 4 years down the line, Carrie was diagnosed with anxiety and depression when she lost custody of her children. In about February 2021 is when she started a relationship with Stephen Davies. But even this relationship was quite often volatile and tense. Carrie was still using alcohol as a coping method for her difficulties. But like Carrie, Stephen was also dependent on alcohol. He was also violent at times. So during their relationship, there was physical and mental abuse on both sides. And it shows how much of a turbulent relationship they had, because the police were called on a number of occasions. Over a year after their relationship had started, in March 2020, Stephen called the police, reporting that Carrie had assaulted him with a can, causing an injury to his lip. Due to that incident, Carrie was placed on bail, facing a further charge of assault occasioning actual bodily harm. And Stephen was also on bail, charged with assaulting her and causing criminal damage. Another 2 months on the 18th of May 2022, Stephen reported to the police that Carrie had slapped him across the head and waved a knife at him. And as she waved this knife, she was apparently uttering threats that she might use it on him. So, once again, Carrie was arrested for breaching a bail. And obviously, one of these bail conditions was that she must not contact him. But it was only 2 weeks later that Stephen was at her flat in Pontypridd, Wales. Now, let's just bear in mind here, they're both on bail. They're not supposed to be seeing each other. They've both assaulted each other a few times. And just for the sake of saying it, he has also got his own accommodation, and that's a few miles away. So I think we've got a point across here that this relationship is already a very unstable one. The pair spent most of the time between the 2nd and the 10th of June together. I think a lot of that time was at Carrie's flat. At first, throughout this week that they spent together, they were getting on really well. Neighbours and friends saw them drinking in the garden, high spirits, everything were well. But then there were arguments as well. There were conflicts and violence on at least 2 occasions. And as you might expect, these occasions were fueled by alcohol. And when I say fueled by alcohol, I don't just mean that I had a bit to drink. Apparently during this week, Carrie had been drinking a lot. She was very heavily drinking, to the extent that at times she told the police that she'd been twice as drunk as she had been in the past. And as a result of these fights during this week, Carrie had ended up with an injury to her face. In the early hours of Thursday the 9th of June, a neighbour heard Carrie screaming at Stephen to get out of the flat, saying, "This is my flat, get out." Stephen tried to calm her down and he tried to reason with her. And obviously he didn't leave, because at some point later that day, Carrie stabbed him. However, by all intents and purposes, this were only a minor wound. It was nothing serious. So they probably kissed and made up. Who knows? And I mean literally, nobody knows. There were no cameras, no witnesses, and Carrie, with that drunk, she probably couldn't remember. Further on in that day, a neighbour saw Carrie walking back from a shop. She'd got some alcohol in a bag. They noticed that Carrie had got a black eye and a cut on the bridge of her nose. So as you quite often would, they'd asked, what's happened? And she said that he'd beat her up. So they asked like, whoa, well, where is he now? And she laughed. And while laughing, she said, he's in the house. I've just stabbed him. And like I said, this is only a small wound. Not to worry about. He's fine. He's not bleeding out. Don't worry about it. That's probably why she's laughing. And up to this point, and I assume it's because it probably seemed like such a small wound, but Stephen hadn't received any medical attention. Well, someone, I think it was Carrie, put some superficial dressing on the wound, but other than that, there weren't anything done. They didn't see any medical experts, nobody were called, literally just put a bit of bandage on it, done. At some point after that, Carrie was seen in the garden by another neighbour. She was crying in the garden over what they described is probably a glass of vodka. She was talking to herself, saying that she'd thought she'd killed him, and what have I done? Then in the early hours of the next morning, so we're now on the 10th of June, it's 5:30 in the morning, and Stephen searches the internet for information regarding swollen bellies in men, and best thing for constipation. It was another 2 hours later that he left Carrie's flat. He was still very much wounded and suffering, but he caught the bus home. At 10 to 9 that morning, while he's now at home, he searched the internet again. He used words, say this, student, vomiting blood and crying in pain, vomiting blood, and other similar terms. Between 10 and 11 o'clock that morning, he spoke to a friend on the phone, and he told this friend that he was dying, but his friend didn't quite take him literally. This friend did try and contact him later though, but he couldn't get through. He didn't make contact. Carrie had also tried to contact him that day, bearing in mind this was the day that he left her flat, but she was unsuccessful. She tried again the next day, and the day after that. She tried phoning him, she tried texting him, but she never succeeded to make contact. And apparently she'd been expecting him to go back round to hers, but he never turned up. And I mean, come on, put your head in gear for a second. I know she's an alcoholic and she's drinking a lot, but you've stabbed him, he's then gone home, you hadn't heard from him for 3 days, even though he's supposed to be coming back. He's not replying to your texts, he's not answering your phone calls. Surely something in your brain must be telling you to go around and check on him. But she didn't. She didn't seek any medical advice. She didn't phone 999. She didn't do anything other than try and phone or text him. And then on the 15th of June, 5 days after Stephen had left Carrie's flat, another friend of Stephen's went round to his house because he hadn't heard of him. And he looked through the window and he saw Stephen naked on his bed, lifeless. So of course this friend phones the police and they come round to the flat and break in. Here's what the prosecution later told the court. Mr. Davies was naked, apart from a pair of slippers, and he was in a kneeling position over a child seat at the base of his bed, with his body hunched over and face down onto the double bed. His legs were stained from the bottom downwards, and there was blood on the bed. On the bedside table next to the bed were 2 plastic bowls that contained dark red, almost black liquid. Mr. Davies was cold to the touch, and his face appeared green. So wait up, this was a small wound. What's actually happened here? Has he been attacked on his way home? Has he been attacked inside his home? Well, the evidence shows that he died within days of the stab wound, but not for at least 36, 48 hours. So he'd gone home in pain, he'd got home, he'd been throwing up blood and everything, he was constipated, he was having serious issues. Guys, if you're having any of them symptoms, and you think it might be cause for concern, especially throwing up blood, phone a doctor. It turns out Stephen actually died from an infection caused by a blade instrument piercing his colon. It caused extensive peritonitis. The wound itself was only 3 centimeters long. It went in 2.5 centimeters deep. And I'm going to touch on this later after the video. But I said, this was only a small wound. We quite often hear in cases like this that the wound were 6 inch deep, 3 inch deep, whatever. We're talking about an inch here. And it is a very important point to make. Like I said, we'll talk about it at the end of the video, but a wound is a wound. Yeah, it weren't a very severe wound, it weren't a fatal wound, but then it went untreated and he died from an infection. No wound is just a small wound. They can all have the capabilities of being fatal. Do not play it down. Ever. Carrie learned about Stephen's death from a friend, but it weren't long after that the police went to her flat. She was interviewed on the day that he'd been found and the day after that. That's the 15th and 16th of June. During these interviews, she told a mixture of truth and lies. She stated that he'd complained about stomach pains and she'd given him some medication that she'd picked up from a local shop. She also referred to a scar on his left side, which she attributed to Stephen self-harming, but no such scar was found. Carrie's flat was searched and blood matching Stephen's DNA was found on an armchair, a pillow and a towel. Used bandages with Stephen's blood on were also found in a bin bag and on the bathroom floor. Female joggers, jogging trousers, with blood on from Stephen and Carrie were also in a bag. And of course, the police also looked around Stephen's own home for clues of what could have happened, but there were absolutely no sign in Stephen's home of any assault. And despite Carrie suggesting otherwise, expert medical evidence later concluded that Stephen could not have caused the injury himself. On the 16th of June, the day after Stephen's body had been found, Carrie was arrested on suspicion of murder. In response to her arrest, she said, "I know I haven't done anything." From the 17th to the 20th of June, she was interviewed 4 times. During these interviews, again, she told a mixture of truth and lies. She denied stabbing Stephen. She described alcohol-fueled fights at her flat and said that they were a mixture of violence and reconciliations. She also told him that he'd hit her, which caused the cut on the bridge of her nose to reopen. But most importantly, she portrayed that during these conflicts, her role was mainly one of self-defense and avoidance, adding that she'd suggested to him that they should spend some time apart, which would have been good advice. I mean, that's what the justice system put the restraining order in for, or part of the bail conditions, which, same difference. She made out to the police during these interviews that Stephen had become ill. He'd been complaining about a bad stomach, which she blamed on food that they'd both had. However, she weren't able to explain the bandaging, the surgical tape, or the blood-stained clothing that had been found in her flat. But she did try and suggest that this blood might have come from her nose. So with these interviews done, Carrie was charged with murder and manslaughter of Stephen Davis. In the preparation for the legal proceedings, the defence organised her to be seen by a psychiatrist over a video link. That was on the 30th of August 2022. 6 days later, on the 5th of September 2022, she pled not guilty on both charges. She was then interviewed by the same psychiatrist again on the 6th of October, and the psychiatrist produced a written report later that month. Another month on the 14th of November 2022, Carrie submitted a defence statement through her legal representatives that basically said that she told the truth through the police interviews and that she had no recollection of stabbing the deceased. She admitted to being an alcoholic and that she had seizures during periods of abstinence and added that her alcoholism impacted her memory. She claimed she had no recollection of seeing a stab wound on Mr. Davis during the period of the 1st of June 2022 to the 10th of June 2022 and denied any knowledge of Mr. Davies sustaining the fatal injury. On the 18th of November 2022, she had an assessment interview with a psychiatrist over a video link which had been arranged by the prosecution. As the other psychiatrist did, this one prepared a report later on in the month. Then on the 6th of December 2022, after the trial had already begun but the jury hadn't been sworn in, Carrie changed her plea to guilty of manslaughter. Both the psychiatrists agreed that Carrie had suffered from depression and anxiety, and despite there being no evidence of major brain damage from chronic abuse of alcohol, a dependency on alcohol amounts to a condition known as severe alcohol dependency syndrome, to the point where it can be properly said that her drinking is involuntary. They also agreed that she suffered seizures when abusing alcohol, and that would affect the memory of events. Now the bit that we all wait for: diminished responsibility. Both the psychiatrists agreed that Carrie's dependence on alcohol led to an abnormality of mental functioning at the time that she stabbed Stephen. And that abnormality of mental functioning is what impaired her ability to exercise self-control. It was for that reason that the prosecution accepted a guilty plea of manslaughter. However, it's not just a case of diminished responsibility or not. The judge has to determine the culpability. And obviously the defence said, low culpability, it's low, it's not her fault. But the judge disagreed. Instead, he sided with the prosecution, which suggested a medium culpability. He also said, "You must have known that you and Mr. Davies were clearly a danger to each other. That's what the bail conditions were for." But the judge didn't sentence Carrie on the basis that she intended to kill him. So the normal starting point for the sentencing was 15 years, with a normal range of 10 to 25 years. Because Carrie had likened the assault to the one that happened in 2013 with her ex, that was an aggravating factor. The other aggravating factors were that she committed the offence while on bail from assaulting the same victim. She used a knife or a bladed instrument. She failed to help him get medical attention. And she played down her level of aggression to the police. She also tried to make him look like the bad one and tried to make it look like he'd self-harmed. The mitigating factors were it was only one stab wound and she didn't intend for it to be fatal, which I can agree should be a mitigating factor. If we look at some of the things that we've seen on this channel, it was a small stab wound. It certainly weren't meant to kill him. It weren't premeditated. He'd used violence on her as well as her using violence on him. She helped him to dress the wound with a bandage. And she didn't kick him out vulnerable. He left on his own accord. Now, the remorse, that was a mitigating factor, but the judge spent a bit of time talking about this. He said that it was only a mitigating factor to an extent, because both the psychiatrists noted that she weren't remorseful, and so did the probation officer. But the judge kind of put remorse because she had a sense of loss, and she felt really guilty, which would have added to her depression. So it's less remorse and more self-pity, I presume. And these mitigating factors and aggravating factors weren't laid out in the same way that judges usually lay them out, in my experience. They were laid out more of the things I'm taking into account, things that I've recognised, things that I'm not going to recognise. With all that in mind, the judge arrived at 17 years, but then he reduced it for the late guilty plea, the very late guilty plea. So Carrie McGuinness was sentenced to 15 years and 6 months. But that's not a minimum term. That is the sentence, extended with 3 years. So what that means is Carrie will serve roughly 2/3, so 10 years and 4 months in prison, and then she'll be let out on licence for the remaining 5 years and 2 months. But the judge extended it for 3 years, meaning the licence will be for 8 years and 2 months, not 5 years and 2 months. So all in all, Carrie's going to do 10 years inside and then be on licence for 8 years after. Now, I appreciate I didn't say all that much about Stephen at the beginning of this, purely because I couldn't find all that much. It's one of them cases that isn't written about very much. So here is what his mum said. "My beautiful baby boy who has been tragically taken from us. We are heartbroken and absolutely devastated. Our lives have been ripped apart and destroyed and will never ever be the same again. Stephen had a heart of gold and would help anyone before thinking of himself, and always have the time for anyone. He was a polite and well-mannered young man. He was a loving, doting brother to Adrian. They were each other's world. I also recognise that I ain't give you the ages, although I did say Carrie's birth year. Carrie was 34 and Stephen was 39. And that's all I've got for you. So this one, with the afterthoughts, comes in quite hard. The first one's addiction. Now, this is going to sound really callous and really brutal, but you have to look after your own self. And I don't like how everyone talks about positivity and negativity these days, but addiction is a major negativity. The problem with addiction is it's in the head. It is an illness within itself. And if an addict is trying to get something, they will get it, because that's how it all surrounds. That's what fills their brain. Now, I'm not trying to play it down. I understand addiction. I understand what addiction is. I'm not saying you shouldn't support these people. I'm not saying you shouldn't be there for these people. But as I said in the last video, or the one before that, you're not a professional. Quite often, if you invest too much of yourself into this, you'll lose a lot of yourself. But then, more from that, I need to address the people with addictions. Don't fool yourself into saying, I'm not addicted, or I don't need help, I can do it on my own. You do need help. That is the fact of it. You're not a little bit or very much addicted, you are addicted. Talk about willpower all you want, you need help. And by not getting help, all you're doing is damaging the people around you. Your children, your family, your friends. Society as a whole, to be fair. But the biggest advice of that is if you're absolutely certain you don't need anybody else, the one biggest thing you have to do is keep away from the negative people. The other addicts. If you're doing sobriety together, that's great. If they start drinking and they're going on a path of self-destruction, advise them to get help. Don't then join in with them. I know it's hard. That's why you have to then keep away. Because the temptation will be there. But I'm not an expert, so I'm going to leave links in the description for addiction helplines. If you have an addiction or you know somebody who does, please do check out them lines. Please do try and get help. It is an absolutely awful thing. And you have all my thoughts and wishes. My thoughts and wishes obviously also go out to Carrie's family and to Stephen's family. Let's not forget, Carrie had 2 children who this entire thing, let's just hope that they haven't been affected by it. And thankfully that she lost custody. Hopefully they're with their family still, happy and safe. The other thing I wanted to say is knife. Now, when I used to do security, in the UK now you have to have a license to do security. And the guy that was teaching us how to pass his license exams, the one thing he used to constantly repeat, and if a knife is drawn, a knife is used. Now that is a statistical fact. It's something stupid like 80% or 90% of the time that a knife is drawn, it's used. So, for example, if you think someone's got a knife and you say to them, "You've got a knife." "No, I haven't." "Yeah, I have." "What's that then?" If they pull it out to show you, there's now a 90% chance, or whatever it is, chance that that knife's going to be used. It doesn't necessarily mean the person carrying the knife or anything. It could be, it doesn't necessarily mean the person that's not carrying the knife. It could be the knife carrier. Either which way, statistically, a very high percentage chance that that knife will penetrate somebody. Now, as I said earlier, we look at cases like this and go, "Hey, we're only an inch deep. So-and-so had a 8-inch. No, it doesn't matter. It is a wound. Your organs aren't all that deep inside you. This knife thing, carrying a knife, using a knife, picking up a knife as defense. Using a knife as defense. Again, there's a high chance that someone's going to get stabbed. It could be you. If it's not you, are you going to get done for manslaughter? Come on, just think about it. Let's get away with this knife thing. The world has got a problem with using knives. And it is very repugnant. Maybe we've not a campaign at one point saying no to knives or something. It's not good, it's not cool. And if you're a teenager watching this, just keep them statistics in mind. If you're carrying a knife for your protection, there's a good chance that you're going to get stabbed with your knife. It is absolutely stupid. There you go. I could rant on about these 2 subjects for a long time. If anyone's watching this and they're going to comment, "Oh, how do you know about addiction? Me. There's no need for it. Look at the description, look at the links. All my respect, by the way, to anybody that has had an addiction and is going through sobriety, has been away from them drugs for a while. Even if it's not a while, even if it's a week. Well done. Well done to you. It's got to be one of the hardest things in life you can do. So be very proud of yourself. Be very proud of people that you know that have done it. And that's it. That's all I'm saying. All I have got to say is, I love you. Take care of yourself. Take care of those around you. And I'll see you next week. Bye.